and welcome to Publish Me, Punish Me, a comedy series that's examining deal practices in the games industry. With me, Ava Carr, founder and CEO at Glitch.
And me, Sun M, the studio director of Perfect Garbage. Each episode will dive into indie publishers, crowdfunding, equity deals, and more.
So whether it's the good, the bad, or just plain yikes, we're looking at it all. If you enjoy listening to a mess of friends talk about game development, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel below. So today, there are no viewer-submitted deals, but we are instead going to talk about crowdfunding, which I know is a favorite topic of Sun's.
I was going to say, my life is a viewer-submitted deal about crowdfunding. I love crowdfunding. I said that like I was being threatened.
Do you actually love crowdfunding?
I love what it means to crowdfund. Like any job. It's a job still. But no, I do love crowdfunding, and I do think that like indie games are starting to really excel at like pushing a crowdfunding mentality. And so I'm very excited about it. I was like, I'm coming in for once with a big brain.
Oh, stop that. You always have a big brain.
Thanks.
But it's extra big when it's about crowdfunding.
Yeah, the moisture's just really sinking in.
Ew.
But yeah, no, I love crowdfunding. Ava, do you like crowdfunding?
I do. I actually really, really love crowdfunding. That being said, I have never crowdfunded before because I recognize how much effort it takes to get crowdfunded and also how much effort it takes to make something to put on a crowdfunding platform. So I commend everyone who's out there doing crowdfunding like you, Sun.
I like to say that when you're pitching to like an investor or publisher, you're just pitching to one person on their team. When you're crowdfunding, you're pitching to as many individuals as possible, as fast as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's start talking about what options there are for crowdfunding.
For about 6 years, Kickstarter has been like genuinely growing as the biggest crowdfunding platform, to the point where publishing studios, not in games, like in comics, as far as I know, use Kickstarter, much to the chagrin of everyone involved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember in the early days, Whitethorn used to do crowdfunding for their games.
Mm-hmm.
So they would like run a Kickstarter for their games, and they were relatively small amounts. If I remember correctly, it was like 5,000 or less, or 10,000 or less.
Wow.
So there was like some dabbling in the publisher kickstarting.
I think like if publishers did it, and we'll talk about it more later, it's a great way of pre-sale. Like it's and it's super efficient, especially if you use things like BackerKit and all that other stuff to add on products. Like I can easily see it. Though I do think it is frowned upon when publishers use it. And it's only gotten worse. It's the stigma of using it has gotten a lot worse. Because it is really seen as like for the indie, like kind of fully. So, you know, if you're a publisher, you might want to dance a little bit on how you explain why you're crowdfunding.
Well, there's two different types of crowdfunding that I know of. And one of them is, of course, just crowdfunding for your project. And then there's also equity crowdfunding, which is a relatively new thing.
I was going to say, I know so little, like the only crowdfunding source for equity that I've ever heard about has been Fig. And even that's relatively new. I didn't hear about it until Chorus ran on Fig.
Yeah, and I heard about it when the folks over at Double Fine decided to run their Psychonauts 2 campaign on Fig instead of on Kickstarter.
Equity crowdfunding, basically, in regards to Fig, is that instead of crowdfunding to individuals that are like maybe pitching in small amounts, you are crowdfunding to investors. So it's usually bigger crowdfunding deals for bigger projects. I'm always hesitant to say as an indie you should do crowdfunding equity. I actually think it's a very, very difficult and dangerous game if you don't have financial safety.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does feel a lot harder, whether it's just for project or if it is for the studio. Either way, I feel like it's very challenging. And again, it's just more people who have an actual like say in how you run your company at this point.
You know, as indies, you're already working against a lot of business structure, like kind of limitations. So I always recommend making things a little bit more streamlined.
Well, aside from both Kickstarter and also Fig, then are there other ones that are out there? Like Indiegogo is another one too, I suppose.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of smaller ones. I just know the biggest one is Kickstarter, and Indiegogo is also great. The difference is that Kickstarter has I want to put in quotes, guaranteed reward system, because there's a fun legal thing that they do,
Oh dear.
which I could talk about. And then Indiegogo has no guarantees. You are purely funding the project, no reward expected, which is why Indiegogo is great. Also, in Indiegogo, you get the money no matter how much you make, versus in Kickstarter, it's all in one.
Yeah. So like if you don't make the initial amount that you are asking for, then you do not receive any of the funding, versus in Indiegogo, you do actually receive whatever you raise.
Which is also bad. I'd like to think that I actually think the Kickstarter all-in-one is way safer, unless you budgeted really poorly, and like that's a whole thing also. But with Indiegogo, you still have to make what you're saying you're going to make, even when you have a significantly small amount of money. So either you're going to get the money from elsewhere, or you're going to have to work on a half-baked project and with that money. There are some people who are really great at strategizing and use Indiegogo as like a fail-safe and like have other systems. Oh, Patreon is like another one. We use Patreon and Perfect Garbage. It's a very small pool, but it's great for like, oh, we need a graphic for this. We have a little bit of emergency cash save thanks to Patreon, things like that. But Patreon's policy is also kind of whack. So that's why I always argue, if you're an indie and you want to crowdfund and you want to make a name for yourself, Kickstarter is, and you have no like prior, like, you're not a big name coming in from something else. Kickstarter is the best way to do it because it has unfortunately and fortunately been legitimized in some way. Kickstarter is seen as a respectable, quote, air quotes are happening, form of crowdfunding, as opposed to some other crowdfunding systems in relation to making games or comics or whatever you're doing. But Kickstarter is also infamously known of projects that never get finished. So you're doing like you've got two doors in front of you. One, that if you succeed, you can exceed really far. And two, that the pressure to succeed is significantly higher because of past mistakes.
I feel like we need to jump into the pros and cons of like crowdfunding in general. Do you want to do it? Okay. So what do we believe that the pros are for kickstarting? One of the first ones that just pops into my mind, for example, is just like complete autonomy and being able to have full control of said Kickstarter crowdfund campaign.
It's a lot of work. You were correct. It's super draining. But you're dedicating a month to doing your own marketing, setting up your own system, making your own rewards, controlling your own budget, planning, I guess, the execution of your entire project. We're going to focus on games, but planning your entire game execution without any other party involvement if you do not want it. You could purely you could be a solo dev pure Kickstarter. Like what?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those. Orange Island.
I really love them because especially when they raise about like at least 100K.
Yeah.
I'm always like, yeah, at least that's like a livable wage salary for yourself to just make this.
Yeah.
That's a big pro for Kickstarting, is that you're fully representing yourself. Most of the time, unless you have some other deal. I've seen people actually have deals. For example, animation will tend to have a deal with like Cartoon Network, but they still kickstart.
Yeah, to get a proof of concept, to see if there's like a player base or a group that's interested, which I think leads us to the next one too, that I think a lot about, which is just like having it be kind of like a place where you can prove out an audience, or like show that there is a group of people that actually want to play your game and would buy your game.
Right. Yeah. That's my favorite thing about Kickstarting, is that you can really just say without any doubt that your game is wanted. I feel like that's the scariest part.
It's wanted.
Well, it's people are desperate for it.
People are thirsty for Love Shore.
Oh my God. Don't name me. Who knows where that game's going? But it is a great way to show, especially when you're doing genres that aren't like big mainstream genres, or you're doing something a little bit more niche. Like Ava brought up Love Shore. We're making a visual novel, which doesn't tend not to work well with publishing, but it has like a huge audience on its own. There's a lot of people who play the ends. And so like, it's really, really great to show that like, look, 2K people back this project as individuals. And like, that is 2K immediate audience and reception.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it really helps build communities. I feel like on Twitter, especially because we use that as a social media platform, you build communities with other smaller studios who use crowdfunding sources. There's a secret in the games industry, actually, where they don't tell you they do this. And so it's also a con, and I can talk about it again more. But sometimes people will already have financial investment from another studio, and they will, or publisher, and they will crowdfund to pay off that investment pretty early. Which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that like as indies, we have to do everything that we can to kind of mitigate costs. And that helps pay back the devs, maybe anything that they've lost and things like that. But the con of that is, and I think this is a stigma that all indies have to suffer with, is that crowdfunding has taught people that games cost less to make.
The budgets on average, I swear, there's like a group that's typically between like the 30 to 70 or like the 50 to 70. And then there's a group that is pretty much like the 120 to 250. And then I don't really see anything beyond that.
I mean, I have a personal experience with under budgeting because I had a false expectation of how much it costs to make a game based on kickstarting market research. 50 to 70 is not a single person's salary, especially if the game is being developed for 2 years. And I think that tends to just slip by. And it's unfortunate, but I actually was talking to Ava, the next game that I want to do is definitely a 6-figure, requires like, we call it middle tier to pitching to publishers, but is almost nigh impossible to kickstart completely. It's just too expensive, and that is an unfortunate fact. I'm hoping that changes. Like, I'm starting to see projects being pushed that are like more expensive with less return. There's so many extraneous factors involved, especially as an indie, that like getting there is probably not going to take like 10 years, 100%. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, it is kind of frustrating to see almost like a soft cap. You know, I think the early days of Kickstarter when people were funding games a lot and they were like, yes, we want to back this. And then people weren't able to deliver really, really hurt digital games on Kickstarter. And so I think slowly confidence might be growing again, but it almost feels like there is some sort of soft cap right around that like 200, 250 mark.
It's brutal. And I also think it ties into the fact that a lot of, game devs are not really great at marketing ourselves. Like, to work on like Kickstarter, you have to build an audience for so long. When we launched Love Short in March 2019, we started promoting it in August 2018. That's like 7 months before the launch. Yeah. And I think that it's hard in indie dev when you are working on your game in real time, as while trying to promote it and build an audience and probably pitch to publishers, because we're all still doing that at the same time. And then running a Kickstarter. A lot of times people, what they do with Kickstarter is that they actually just hope to get a prototype or a proof of concept using a Kickstarter. And I actually really hope that we become more forgiving and let that happen instead of expecting full games just out of Kickstarter. Because if I could just fund a prototype and show that I could do it with the money raised, I think it's even easier then to kickstart the full game right after you've made the prototype. You're like, you gave me 120K. I made this prototype. Help me with 800,000 or whatever you need to fund the full game. Like, that's like my dream, like steps, which don't tell anyone, I'm trying to figure it out.
Don't tell anyone, as I tell everyone who's watching this show. I love it. I think that there's something there. Do you think that your players would actually even be okay with that, right? Like you kickstarting your prototype.
The thing with games, as opposed to like animation, because animation has done that, by the way. Animation on Kickstarter, if you spend some time looking it up, there's the huge ones, Critical Role with 11 million.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. But animation has worked itself to actually raising money to fund a minute or two of animation to make a prototype. They have been doing
so that they can essentially go pitch it.
Yeah. And
to a major network.
It's been growing in animation. I don't think people in games will be as nice. For example, not the Toot the Moonrise Fund, but there are not a lot of prototype funding deals. It's very, very difficult to get that, even though it's considered by everyone I've ever met the most important part about making games is somehow funding the prototype.
Literally one of the most important things in my opinion, but I'm biased, so don't listen to me about this topic.
You can't do anything without a prototype. You can draw as much pretty pictures as you want. You can design as much UI as you want. You can write these beautiful GDDs, but if you can't have a test, it will go nowhere unless
Yeah.
you are an incredibly connected white man. And I'm hoping that changes by transparency. I think that people are becoming more and more transparent about what it costs to make a game, how pitching works, who has the money, how to raise that money, how long does it take. And I feel like that's really important. When we kickstarted Love Shore, we said it would take us 2 years, and that was actually a really big hurdle to jump over because people are used to Kickstarters being instantaneous because people don't realize that they already made and then they're just kickstarting, and then that money is just returning back into the devs' pockets or whoever like needs that money back. But rather, we were kickstarting the fact that we wanted to make it. So we needed that like time period to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that people just aren't used to it. They're really uncomfortable. And I understand too. It's like some vague time in the future you're going to get this reward.
Oh, absolutely. I completely get that.
Yeah.
Like, I get that. And it doesn't feel tangible. Like, we as humans like things now. Like, we buy thing, we get now. Let's talk a little bit about the maybe not so fun parts of Kickstarter or the not so fun parts of crowdfunding your project, your game, let's just start there.
Games.
Games.
Games. When you're kickstarting
games.
Well, like, there's a stigma with crowdfunding, and I think that's important.
What is that stigma?
People don't like it. It's interesting because when I was crowdfunding, I thought that I would be able to prove the proof of concept. Like, there are lots of individuals who want our game, but it's sometimes a negative depending on who you talk to. There's one, the stigma is that your game couldn't be picked up. And it's so funny that that is a thing that exists because most of the people who I ever see crowdfunding are usually marginalized creators who are like trying to get eyes and money focused. So there's that hurdle. I've also heard from some friends who work in publishing that Kickstarter is often viewed as pre-sales. And so that means that you've already marketed to whatever audience you are ever going to have. So it's over. There's no more need to invest in you. Because those 2K people who supported the Kickstarter are it, you know?
Like, even the fact that you're saying that there are a lot of marginalized people that do choose to go the Kickstarter route. Like, let's ask, why is it that a lot of marginalized people do kickstart their games? Then the following is like, okay, well, now that they've kickstarted their game, they've showed the proof of concept, all the things that we say that are really, really great about, you know, the power of crowdfunding. Saying that that's a cap feels like a cop-out to me for saying, no, I'm not interested because your game is 2X, 2Y, 2Z.
It is lazy on the publisher's part. Or whoever, or the investor, whoever you're talking to, if that's the excuse of when you kickstart. And it's funny because it is an excuse I've heard a lot. And if you're interested why we're talking about crowdfunding and then publishing, it's because usually crowdfunding doesn't actually fund the full game. So you have to do some more fundraising in other ways, unless, like, you know, you're a dev making compromises, but only the privileged can really do that anyway. So we're back to who's crowdfunding.
I'll share this. Like, I don't typically kickstart a lot of things because I actually just really like buying them when they come out. And so it's a very strange mentality to me to just hear like, hey, I'm not going to fund this because you've reached the max amount of people that would potentially actually buy your game.
We had 2K, less than 2K, I think 1.6K supporters on Kickstarter, but our Steam wishlist is over 6K. So I'm like, there's a disconnect. It really matters when you launch, how long you've been promoting, what you're raising for, who you're talking to, your strategies, email lists, press lists. And this is all stuff that, especially if you're focused on development of your game, is so much extra work. I remember we paused making anything Love Shore related for the 3-month period right before the Kickstarter, right after the Kickstarter, because we just had to organize ourselves. Another thing about crowdfunding is that it's going to force you as an indie to get really good, or you will die trying to get really good at management, upkeep, and taxes. You have to make an LLC when you run a Kickstarter. I know a lot of people say you don't, but I really recommend you do, because
who says you don't?
Well, because you technically legally don't. Like, you don't have to actually have an LLC when you run a Kickstarter, but then that's legally tied to you. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand that can put you in a really bad spot if things don't go perfectly according to plan. You have to maintain where your money's going and like a level of detail, because Kickstarter, if you raise over 20K, is going to send a form to the IRS. So you have to match like whatever's happening there. That also means that you have to spend all of your money. This is US based. You have to spend all of your money the year you kickstart. And if you don't, you either have to do the accrual method of taxing, which is not easy if you don't know what that is, or you have to just get taxed on it and lose
the majority of it.
A third of that income. Yeah. And it's funny because no one also reminds you that Kickstarter takes 8%. So you've got Kickstarter fees, you're going to have possible taxes, and then, you know, however you're paying people, you're probably going to use an invoice system, which also is going to have, if you're working with a team, is also going to have fees. So like that money vanishes really, really quick. And if you're not maintaining that and understanding that and having you need a separate bank account, God help you. If you do not have, you have only one. But there's so many little things that I think that if you're not business inclined, and like knock on wood, I was when I started the Kickstarter, because it wasn't my first rodeo. But I've talked to other devs who was their first time kickstarting, you know, they succeeded. And then they were like, holy, what am I supposed to do with like this huge lump sum and like redistributing it? How do I write it in my forms? Because if it is tied to you, you're going to jump in tax bracket if you don't make.
Yeah, and that's going to be murder. You don't want that. Don't do that to yourself.
Suddenly upper middle class.
And you're like, but this is all for my project. It's not for me.
Oh my God. Which is what the accrual method is your friend. But those are the things that you need tax information for, and they're not easy to Google. So like you might have to hire an accountant. You might have to pay for extra services to help, especially in your state, learn how to do it.
I almost want to call it like an entrance fee of the fact that you do need to know essentially like how to run a small business in order to be able to make it happen.
Especially when we talk about the reward system in Kickstarter, which is a bit of a nightmare. I actually hate the reward system in Kickstarter. I know it's like the main reason why it works at all, but so legally, Kickstarter, if you read their terms of service, when you do a Kickstarter, it says in the terms of service that you are never guaranteed anything.
Yeah.
So that is like a safety net for them. So these reward systems, as indie devs, you'll be pressured to make physical rewards, and that also eats up the Kickstarter money.
Yeah, like shipping. It always strikes me as interesting about how do people actually get their Kickstarter up? Like what does, like everything that you've talked about takes so much time and so much pre-production. Who the heck funds that? And how do people typically fund that whole pre-production process of getting something up on Kickstarter?
So this is the saddest part about Kickstarting. This is things get sad. There's certain factors in kickstarting that matter. You need a video. 60% of Kickstarters with a video succeed as opposed to without. So videos are mandatory. You need tons of visuals. No one likes to read. So you got to have a lot of art and concept work. And for games, it's so expected to have a demo.
Expected. Yeah.
Even if it's a barely functioning proof of concept, here's what it looks like. Here's what we're going for demo.
I was just going to say, like, the three things you just told me cost a heck of a lot of money. Video. I mean, like some videos, for example, or even like a trailer can be anywhere between, you know, on the low end, $2,000, on the high end, like 30 plus grand to make a really dope trailer. And if the trailer is the main thing that sells your game, like, you're probably going to put in time and money into that. And art is also not cheap. Son, please tell me how much it costs to do art.
Well, here's the thing. People also forget that if you're working with contractor artists, you're also buying the copyright when you're using art. So that, and it should increase the price significantly, right? If you're going to be using it all the time.
Like the three big things that you listed off are probably some of the most expensive pieces of it all.
I ask you, do they differ for what you need for pitching to publishers or investors?
I'd say that the answer is no. It isn't
so you
that
need
different.
You need those three no matter what avenue.
I would say that on average, like those three things are great to have. And those three things, especially with publishers, you probably want to have in some capacity.
So no matter what, you need a prototype, which is the real where the money goes. And that's why I'm like, Kickstarting is still a luxury, right? Because you have to get to that point. Either that means there's a person funding that. For like Perfect Garbage's game, it was me in the beginning.
Yeah.
I was like working on summer jobs and things like that to put money into it.
Yeah.
Or that everybody isn't getting paid, especially in indie games. Everyone I know who works in like that level has multiple jobs. You know what I mean? Everyone is trying to maintain themselves as best as they can. So Kickstarting is a privilege in that way. But I have beginning to see games that might not have demos. But the risk is really, really high because, the trust is the biggest issue with Kickstarter, which is why it's also really important to, like, if you have a name for yourself, to tie your name to it, like as an act of transparency, but then the danger, if something goes awry, you are tied to that Kickstarter. It's a yikes.
It's a yikes.
It's a yikes. Kickstarting is like a yay and a yikes at the
same it's like time. A double-edged sword, right?
Yeah. The moment we can start raising funds of the actual worth of a game, to develop, is like the moment we made it. The moment a studio can successfully raise $800,000 for their indie game with a team of like 10 is the moment we made it. It's sad because a lot of people I talk to who do like indie Kickstarters tell me, oh, we're kickstarting it now and then we're finding a publisher after. It's like the super common like default, and the majority of them do not find a publisher after. It's the two-step process that people think it'll be like their entryway into it. When it's not, it's even harder because now you're in a tight spot. I'm still gonna kickstart.
I hope you do. I think that there's like that's a thing that you are incredibly good at, Sun. And I hope that you, and I am willing to bet that you are going to figure it out and how to make it work within your model, within your studio.
I just can't wait till people start funding smaller projects for prototypes, like 10,000 to do like a small thing, and that's like so commonplace.
Galaxy Fund.
The Galaxy Fund.
And with that, we're at the end of the show.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Publish Me, Punish Me. This is a lot more talking about aspects that are publishing and punishing about the process. We didn't do any deals this episode, but if you do have a deal that you would like to talk about, or a crowdfunding deal situation,
I would love that.
You can submit to us in a form that's somewhere around us.
Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Any thoughts, questions, concerns you might have, please don't hesitate to just post in the comment section. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, you can find us over at discord.gg/heyglitch. And with that, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening and thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. Make the game of your dreams.
Crowdfund it,
but ask for help.
And pay yourself.
There's a lot of rules you're throwing in at the end here. You guys want to